I feel like the Trump Republicans and the modern Democrats kind of embody opposite problems in this way, where the Democrats have very much this kind of top-down kind of we'll censor what we don't like view. And you see that with Biden's age. You see that with holding Kamala Harris away from media interviews because she might start laughing like she used to do years ago. We saw that with COVID. We see this with crime data. We see this with so many issues where they're like, if we can just hide the part that we disagree with, like, it'll be okay. Then Trump's kind of the opposite, where he'll say anything that comes to mind, whether it's that Haitians are eating cats and dogs.
Welcome to Moral Mayhem. Today, Vaish and I are joined by Maxim Lott. Maxim is an executive producer for John Stossel and the creator of electionbettingodds.com, which provides composite odds from various betting markets. Maxim, thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to share a little bit more about your background and what got you into this work in the first place?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been in journalism for more than 15 years. And almost since the start, I've been covering prediction markets with John Stossel. And it's been a very interesting journey following them as they've kind of gone through different iterations based on the regulations in play. And 10 years ago, I started electionbettingodds.com to just aggregate all the different markets and show people what's going to happen in the future according to the market. And it's really a cool technology, especially from a libertarian perspective, because, right now we're used to the stock market, which uses markets to allocate capital to, where it needs to be. But prediction markets are this kind of new concept where you're using markets to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And we've been tracking it for almost 10 years. It has a really good track record. When they say it's a 70% chance a certain candidate's going to win, it actually happens about 70% of the time. So that's why prediction markets are cool. And that's one of the biggest things I've followed in my journalistic career.
When you say they're right, if they say 70%, it happens roughly 70% of the time. What's like the time delay on that? Like when would you be comparing what the market says to what the outcome is? Or is there a window at which it becomes not very predictive?
Well,
and they're not super,
I calculated my statistics from the morning of the election. So it's, 8 a.m. on election day. What are the odds? You can go back out further. I have not done that, but there have been studies that did have done this for very specific windows. And they find that they're still accurate months in advance. Like there's less accuracy, but they're still quite accurate.
Can you give us a lay of the land in terms of sort of just what are the broad liquidity pools that typically play in these political prediction markets, and kind of what also just quantitatively, what's the depth of the market and so on?
Yeah. So there's a lot of money in these markets. Even last cycle, there was more than $1 billion bet between the different markets. This year, we're looking to hit that as well. Each cycle, there are different markets in play due to kind of the crazy regulatory environment. Some players get knocked out, some pop up. Right now, Poly Market is the big player, and it's crypto based. So people around the world send their crypto there, and they bet. And they have more than $500 million bet just on the presidential race already. So it's a very liquid market. You could plunk down $100,000 there without moving the market very much. So, you can make real money if you know better than the odds.
But if there's an institutional, this was something Reagan was bringing up to me before we talked, if a institutional player or a government wanted to move the market, it's still, I'm guessing a billion total market size is still small enough that for an individual, it's hard to move the market. But if you have an agenda, you could probably move the market. Is that roughly right?
Yeah. If you're a billionaire, you can certainly move a market that has $1 billion total going on. If you're a government, you can certainly do that. Even still, maybe you could move it 10% or something. But if you want to really mess with it, you're going to have a lot of smart people going in and saying, this is just wrong, and trading against you. And the more you want to move it, the harder and harder it gets. And also the longer you want to hold it there. So I think market manipulation is pretty hard. Another interesting thing is right now, election betting odds tracks 4 different markets. And they're actually quite hard to arbitrage. This is very unusual with markets. Normally they're all the same, because if one's higher than the other, you make money by selling one and buying the other. But because of regulatory barriers, these are very hard to arbitrage. 2 of the markets are only available to people in the UK and certain European countries. One of them is only available to Americans and has an $850 cap on trading. The other one's this crypto company that doesn't officially take Americans. And so if you're a government that has a nefarious goal and wants to manipulate this, you're going to have to go to all of these markets. So last night, for instance, it moved towards Harris, and I noticed all of the markets moved towards Harris by 4 or 5 points. And so that tells me there's probably not manipulation going on, because all these traders are seeing the same thing.
And presumably there's the other. Yeah, I guess I want to ask you how you view that pool, which is like the non-monetary, whatever forecasting platforms like, Metaculus or kind of Manifold or something. Is there much sort of divergence between those 2 often, or what are the trends you see there?
Yeah, there's not a ton of divergence. The play money markets like Manifold have been more pro-Harris in the last couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks they had Harris leading by several points, whereas the real money markets had Trump leading by several points. Honestly, the play money markets don't have a long enough track record to say they're better or worse. They did at least as well in 2022, but this is just one election. Really, we need a couple more cycles to have any clear sense. What I do know is that Nate Silver, his models are about as accurate as the betting has been, and he has the best models. They're really good compared to everyone else's. So I think it's positive for the bettors that, if you take the best single model, they're just as good. So.
I wanted to ask one more thing about the betting markets, and then we can talk a little bit more about the shift since the debate. But with the question of moving the market or market manipulation, because I think people bring this up with respect to potential election interference, and what aim would it help you to exact if you could move one of these betting markets, or would you have is that a real concern, or does that not? Because I just feel like it's very unclear what effect doing that would have. And if I'm a foreign government or something, it doesn't seem like a particularly effective way, but maybe I'm missing the logic there. You
can certainly envision reasons you'd want to do this. Last night, for example, I was talking with a hardcore Trump supporter, and the betting odds were showing that Harris won the debate, and he was saying, well, maybe they're just manipulated. And you could see why. Let's say you want Harris to win. You want to create a narrative that she won the debate. So it would be helpful if the odds increased during the debate. So that's just one example. And you can see, when they have this Democratic surrogates on TV, they're saying, yeah, Harris won. She just blew it out of the water. And it seems like she did win this. But you can see they are invested in creating this narrative. So it seems like there's a reason. Now, is it worth putting down $1 billion that you're going to lose some of it because you're making an incorrect prediction? Maybe it's not worth doing that. So the cost is high as well to manipulation.
I guess it does assume, though, to Regan's point, that moving the market, let's say you move the market in Kamala's favor, right? Would that just energize swing voters who wanted to vote for Trump to come out and vote, or would that kind of disincentivize and demoralize? They're both seem like plausible stories, at least, that you could tell, right?
Yeah, I agree with that too. You also have to worry about complacency on one's own side.
Yeah.
So it is more of a gray area than people initially assume. It's not like, oh, you moved the market to Harris, now she's going to win because the right is demoralized or something. You know, it's more complicated than that. It's people, I think manipulation is oversold as a potential problem, especially as these markets get bigger. You know, do we worry that much about manipulation in NVIDIA or Tesla or something? We worry about irrationality, but I don't think we worry too much about manipulation.
Yeah, no, it's actually like the regulations keeping the market small leaves them more open to manipulation than they probably would be if they were allowed to just grow naturally.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, okay, so I agreed with, we can talk about what we all thought of the debate maybe quickly. I agree with the betting markets that Kamala soundly won the debate. I don't know if you guys want to comment, or how big was the shift in odds post-debate?
Trump was down like 3.5%. Kamala Harris was up 3.5%, 4%. So that's a pretty big shift. Basically, Trump went into the debate a very slight favorite to win the election, and he went out of it a very slight favorite to lose the election. So she clearly won. It's not necessarily, it's still a very, very tight race. The markets were clear that she won. It was pretty, like, within a half hour, they had rendered their verdict. I agree. I thought Harris has done as well as she's ever done on the public stage. Trump did kind of his normal self, which was okay. Like, he was the same person he was against Biden a few months ago, which was mediocre. But instead of against Biden, he was against Harris on her A game. She clearly prepped very well and extensively.
If I can ask one more question that might keep us on the meta level, but excuse me, but I guess I have a fundamental question about how wise is it to update on debates anyway, and what are the margins on which people actually update their voting behavior based on debates? So a lot of what you see if you watch a debate with people is sort of meta commentary on, well, this won't bode well for Trump. It's sort of like a projection onto other people on how they would react if they saw it. And so my question is what honest, good signals are we getting in the debate, and what margins are important there? Because you can take that as, I know it's a vague statement, but I'm sort of confused if I wonder if there's any empirical evidence on kind of how predictive the wisdom of the crowds after debates tends to be on election results.
Yeah. So Nate Silver has done statistical modeling to answer this question. He says that a single debate is worth about a week of campaign time. So kind of the same amount of extra variance you see during just a week up to the election is how much you get from a debate. So it's definitely not zero. There's people are updating. We'll see. None of the polls are out from the last debate. We'll see soon if it actually changed anyone's mind. And it's possible that even if most of the country says, well, Harris won, it's possible that the median voters may have said, well, Trump hammered home the border issue, and that's what I care about. So we're going to have to look at the polls. Right now, the bettors think Harris won, but it could still have an unpredictable effect on voting.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel like Trump was more speaking to his base rather than trying to, I felt Kamala was trying to be relatively centrist in the way she, with respect to Israel and some other things that came up. But I think that the doubling down on the election, January 6th stuff being justified, and that he didn't fully concede that he lost the election, I think was a worse performance than at the Biden debate, personally. But
yeah, I mean, I think the questions were a lot harder for him than at the Biden debate.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think the questions were biased against Trump?
I do. Yeah. They only fact checked him. There were so many things that she also said that were incorrect. So yeah, I think they were biased. It's common. There's no doubt who those anchors are voting for. but that's also
Cliff Asness from AQR had a good tweet on this where, I mean, he said it better than I will, but something along the lines of, well, it's clear that Trump did his usual unsophisticated lying, and Kamala, on the other hand, crafted more sophisticated lies that were even less fact-checked. And so to me, it wasn't clear that Kamala was, at least on epistemics, being that much better than Trump.
I agree.
Right?
I think it's interesting if you watch the debates from 2008 or 2012, all the candidates kind of played within a certain rule box, which is you basically try not to lie. You can kind of give misleading statistics, but you don't just make stuff up. Trump really changed that in 2016, where he's just like, I'm okay with making stuff up. If I kind of feel it's directionally true, I just don't care. And it seemed to work for him. And quite frankly, I think the Democrats have decided to go down to his level. And Harris said lots of things, whether it's the both sides things that, that Trump allegedly said Nazis were very fine people. Even Snopes says that's false. If you just play the tape 7 seconds longer, he says, and I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about these other people. She had lots of lines that she must know they're not true on her past stances too, like fracking, guns, all those things that were called out. She did take, and Medicare, government-run healthcare in 2019, she did take the far left position on all those. So we did a Stossel video just going through a record, and she says it in clear terms. She says, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. And it's not true, as she's claimed that in 2020 she had reversed that. She just didn't. Again, the mainstream outlets fact-checked this too. They said, yeah, we went to the 2020 debate. She did not say, I'm now in favor of fracking. So she's just lying about lots of things as well. And I don't know who does more, but it is impressive, I think, from Harris's perspective. It's kind of a master class in political speech where she dodges the question artfully. Trump is a little more of just an open book. If you throw a trick question at him, he'll just answer it in whatever muddled way seems right to him. There's no strategy, it feels like. And it's just very different approaches.
Yeah, one aesthetic thing that I think bothers a lot of people, and maybe it is more than simply aesthetics, where, one worry that definitely left of center people, but also maybe more centrist types also have, is the extent to which the kind of the worst cesspools of Twitter right-wing populism feed into Trump's actual policy and his, cognitive state, and just the stuff around, Haitians eating dogs or cats or whatever, right? Like, it's just, he had to have known that, like, there was a very high probability that a lot of that was going to turn out to be false. And even if it's true, it just sounds so ludicrous that it's like so stupid to double down on it. And I think it's those types of things that I think like kind of reinforced for people, or might have reinforced for people on the margin, that this guy's just he's accountable. If you think about who is the principal to his agent, the answer shouldn't be like the worst sections of the base, and I think that's like sometimes the answer he's giving people.
Yeah, with the Haitians eating cats and dogs thing, I see people on Twitter, they have all these videos of people interviewing locals on the street who say, yeah, it's happening. And they apparently put 20,000 Haitians, put them in the small town. So you can imagine that there might be assimilation issues there. But it sounds crazy regardless of the fact. But then again, you could see Trump is very strong, does very well on the border issue, on immigration. And if this just puts that issue to the top, maybe that helps him in a weird way. So there's all sorts of factors here. At the end of the day, though, the bettors do think that Harris benefited from the debate. So that's probably the big picture takeaway.
Yeah, I also thought this was the best I've seen her, probably. She just seemed very confident, and she had she was able to a little bit play the game of like when she made the cutting remark about foreign leaders laughing at Trump. It felt like she was getting to him a little bit, which obviously Biden was never in a state to do anything of the sort.
No, and then
even
Biden said,
last
"No,
cycle,
no,
honestly.
no,
So
Victor Orban loves me," and everyone was like, "Wait, that's I don't think people are. I don't think anyone in America is like, of course, Victor Orban loves Trump, so he must be great."
Right,
It's just like a losing point. I was if I want to kind of get your take on two broad sort of like object level things that, which in my opinion are the clinchers for both for either side. So on the one hand, you have like if you want to think about. I don't know if you read the piece that Sam Hammond wrote on the EA case for voting for Trump, right? It was just sort of like here's what like really matters, and on these things, Trump is better. Mainly dominated by sort of like prospects for long-term economic growth, which just tends to dominate other considerations if you take a long enough time view. And then if you pose it to people that don't that think that's still not a good enough reason, at least the smartest version of that of the objection I've heard is, well, it's true that the expected value might be positive, but they have a strong intuition that the tail risks are much greater with Trump, right? And to be honest, like I am not quite sure exactly how no one has explained to me exactly how these tail risks cash out, but maybe that's too onerous a requirement to place on people. But I think the intuition is coming from a place of, norm violations and like threat to democracy, all these things. Yeah. I wanted to ask, like, what do you think of this very broad issue on like how should a reasonable Bayesian think about this from first principles?
Well, I have a post I have a Substack called Maximum Truth, and I have a post in my drafts folder that's most of the way done, a rational case for Trump. And we'll see if I still feel strongly enough to post it. But I basically mostly agree with the post, an EA case for Trump. But I do agree with what we were saying. I think the strongest case against that is this tail risk, the idea that Trump is so comfortable with norm violation that something crazy could happen. That said, the track record of his last 4 years, if we're talking like foreign policy, stuff like that, the world was a lot more peaceful. So I don't know. It's like, are you looking? I don't think there's any simple Bayesian answer. It's like, I don't know. Are we going to look at the track record? But then maybe one reason the world was more peaceful is because foreign leaders were afraid if they attacked or anything, well, maybe Trump would break out the nukes or something or escalate in a crazy way. And maybe if they had called his bluff, something crazy and horrible would have happened. So it's really hard to evaluate that.
Vaish talks about that, the unpredictability, being both a positive and a negative. Mm-hmm. But I'm just like, the fact that it's unpredictable is exactly the tail risk thing. It's like people don't know exactly what could happen. That's the point, is that we feel that the range of outcomes that could happen under Trump are just wider. And one of them is, the further erosion of norms, et cetera. Although I think that much of that already happened, with Trump being president the first time. I find the argument that a Trump election will make people way more crazy woke again somewhat convincing. But then on the other hand, I am also somewhat convinced by the idea that if Trump wins, election fairness concerns will be at least somewhat ameliorated relative to Kamala winning. And that's something, I don't know. I'm worried about, I think Trump created that problem, obviously, and has stoked it, including last night. But the only real upside for me, because I'm somebody who thinks the tail risk is too large, essentially, and Kamala is a better bet, even though I don't necessarily agree with a bunch of policy positions. But I do think that it would be harder for the Republican base to make the case that it's reasonable to be worried about election fraud if Trump wins this time.
Yeah, I think that's true. What I see as the strongest case for Trump is like if you look at the people who would be advising him or surrounding him and who have influence over him, it's often at this point people like Elon Musk or other kind of innovators, even like Vivek Ramaswamy. There's some smart people now who he's listening to. And those are people I think you want influencing policy because they're innovators. They know how to get things done, what needs to get done for society. Whereas the people advising Harris, if she were president, are, the typical bureaucrats. And just the contrast between those, I think, is pretty great. And that I think is definitely the strongest case I see.
Yeah, I actually want to build on that because I agree. I think that is if the reason Reagan and I kind of disagree on which way we lean on this is primarily because I think of, more so than last time, the people around him this time are people that I want informing policy. But this is where Trump's personality poses one more concern, which is like last night, if you looked at his performance, if you just look at the call that he did with Elon, where Elon was trying his best to kind of just bring the horse to water or to the water as much as possible, and he just was not an easy subject, right? And I think it's a fair perception that Trump is a misaligned agent that basically is unalignable to some extent, at least in terms of what he chooses to say. Now, but to me, some of that is ameliorated because what we saw in the White House in the 4 years he was there, as you pointed out earlier, was not a whole lot of completely crazy policy making. It was basically doing a lot more traditionally conservative stuff for the most part. And so, meaning he was listening to people around him. That's my kind of inference. Now, I don't know if I'm being too gullible there, but that's how I'm thinking about it. I don't know if you guys have a response to that.
Yeah, I agree with the track record. I mean, it does seem like very conventional conservative policies got implemented under his first administration. Also, if you're looking at judicial appointments, basically originalist type readers of the Constitution got appointed. And that's the kind of thing that is still making a big difference. I mean, abortion's what got the all the attention, but big rulings have happened on regulation, saying that now courts will not defer to the regulators as they used to. Big changes like that, I think, make a big difference.
Yeah, that's the Chevron deference thing, right? And then I guess on the other side, feel free to come back to Trump, but I think I'm shifting to what people are most worried about. The Harris administration is mostly that I think it seems clear that whether that's her personal policy position or people around her, she comes from a part of the party that's to the left of Biden, if anything, and that's a lot of what we've seen. But even on foreign policy, the people she listens to don't seem to be people that I would certainly feel comfortable the American president listening to, especially on things like Iran and so on. But Matt Iglesias made this point, and I don't actually know. Give me the Steelman case for his argument first, if any of you can think of it, which is he was saying, well, think of all your worst fears about Trump and Harris. It's much more likely that the price gouging stuff, the rent control stuff, just wouldn't make it through Congress, and she just wouldn't be able to actualize the things that most reasonable people are most worried about Harris. And you can't say the same for Trump. I don't quite understand why you can't say the same for Trump. Do you have an intuition whether on if that statement sounds right to you, if it has some merits, because I want to see if there's something there.
I think it's complicated. If Harris were to have, so it looks like if the Democrats win the Senate, it's just going to be by like one seat this time around. If maybe 2 years from now they were to get a greater margin, then you could imagine them scrapping the filibuster in order to codify Roe, and then maybe they'd also say, okay, we'll pass your rent control bill, President Harris. So certainly not impossible. Maybe it's very unlikely the next 2 years. Trump's things, it's true, there's some things you can do by executive order, in particular tariffs. So there might, but this is pretty narrow. I mean, tariffs are such a small part of his platform. There are other things he can do that are good, like trimming agency staff and telling them to regulate less. We started talking about prediction markets. That's actually an interesting difference, where the Biden CFTC recently said we're going to ban prediction markets. And that's currently a formally proposed regulation working through the regulatory process. And it was the Democrat CFTC commissioners who all supported the ban, saying we are preserving democracy by banning prediction markets, which could lead to manipulation, et cetera. And it was the Republicans saying this seems heavy-handed regulation. And it's interesting because this isn't an issue that really any Americans are thinking about.
Right.
Even the intellectual class, I think most Democrats are fine with prediction markets, but somehow just the baseline bureaucrat instinct on the left is ban it, and on the right it's just don't meddle. And so that's just an example of the instincts being better on the Republican side.
And that's kind of specific to American Republicans, right? Or I mean, to the American right wing more so than it's not like a guarantee that right wing are always anti-regulation, I guess, but just in the U.S., it does seem to be very, very clearly, strongly in that direction. Other than when it comes to reproductive health,
right?
Then they're for regulation,
right?
One thing I was going to ask you guys with the increase in like sort of the tech bro support for Trump, and other people who are, like you said, innovators, whatever, people who are very intelligent, people who would have been considered coastal elites a few years ago. How do you think that longer term can play with the Trump base? Because to me, I feel like these groups, like the populist right and the pro-progress, anti-regulation, libertarian tech right, share very little else in common. So I just wonder how he's going to navigate trying to listen to those guys while still seeming like he's the populist support guy longer term.
That's a good question. I mean, I think the Trump base generally is pretty pro someone like Elon Musk, who maybe epitomizes this tech shift towards Trump. So at least so far, there don't seem to be any big hatred between these groups. I think there's a lot of disdain for the old guard Republican, like corporate class. Somehow the tech people are different. They're like the rebels within that corporate class.
It's also notice how like Reid Hoffman, there's actually if you look at a lot of, look at Jan LeCun or Reid Hoffman, there's a lot of sort of old Silicon Valley people that are very strongly behind the Democrats, right? And then in some ways you can see this in AI where the people sort of like calling for more deregulation are the venture capitalists that have an incentive to do that, right? So Andreessen Horowitz comes to mind. But on the other hand, people that are at the helm of established companies are doing what you would expect they do, which is welcome, sort of like the state putting in barriers. So I don't know. That's at least one way to conceptualize it. And then I guess to Regan's earlier point around the compatibility, I don't know. One instinct I have is around the fact that at some level we'll have to accept that no president could enact some libertarian utopia. So there's going to have to be, giving into interest groups and doing suboptimal things. The question is, if you have to spend on that, where are you generating the extra revenue to do that? And I guess I'm much happier for that to come from deregulation than from higher taxes, for example. So it's like, okay, we have to accept some level of inefficiency. And the question is, how are we making that whole? And it seems like even on housing, where I was initially happy to see kind of Harris talk about at least pay lip service to some EMB stuff. But like, if you look at what her instincts are around how to do that, they're all deeply, deeply problematic, right? I mean, it's just like subsidizing. It's like constricting supply and subsidizing demand. Like that's her answer.
She's subsidizing demand further. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she wants price controls, I believe, and even Trump, who's not very economically literate, he's like, yeah, this never works. Mess there.
When Trump is doing better economic analysis than you, not a ideal situation. But yeah, just last point on the sort of like tech right and the populist right. I think that right now culturally they feel compatible because of what you were talking about like the rebellious nature that is shared, and like, obviously Elon panders to that base, 20 times a day also, and therefore helps direct what that base is becoming. But it does seem like there's some real like policy differences that you would have. Like, I feel like the populist right is for regulating big tech and doing, tariffs and all these kinds of things, which shouldn't line up with the tech right goals. But yeah, I think at the surface level, it, doesn't feel like a divergence right now, but I just don't see how that can like sustain long term.
Yeah, I mean, you often end up within political coalitions having groups that don't like each other that much. But the religious right has been in the same party as very free market, more libertarian types for a long time. And definitely there's been fighting there on the left. Of course, you have this Jewish coalition that's now in the same party as very anti-colonialist, let's say, pro-Palestine people. They're having a big fight right now, and plenty of movements of don't vote for Harris because they're having such discord there. So you're going to have, if you're trying to get half the country within one coalition, you're always going to have some fighting, and maybe the tech bro versus steelworker thing is tolerable within a coalition, at least for now.
Yeah. Did you guys have any thoughts on how she dealt with the questioning around Israel?
She seemed to do a good job to me. Trump's line was kind of comical. he's like she hates Israel, but also she hates the Palestinians just as much. Okay, I don't know if anyone's actually buying that.
I think it was funny when Trump called Biden. He was like, well, he's a Palestinian. He's so bad on Israel. He's almost like a Palestinian, but they hate him too. He's a bad Palestinian.
Right. So it's okay. It's comedy.
Just going back to sort of some of this norm violation stuff, we quickly exchanged some thoughts around like, how much is Trump uniquely responsible for norm violations? And I kind of agree with Regan that it seems like he's, at least it's fair to attribute the source of it mostly to him. Is that a good analysis in your mind, or do you think that's unfair too? Because the way I think about it is he's probably the source, and the game theoretic nature of this is such that like if you defect on norm violations, you're going to get defections on the other side, and that's kind of like what we're getting in a race to the bottom type of dynamic.
Yeah. I think that's true within the political sphere, that he's the source of it. I do think leading up to 2015, when he announced his candidacy, you saw some movements within the culture that in some way were norm violations. So you started to see universities and the press go woke, basically, as we now call it. And this has been quantified. You can see the graphs where just terms
Or
like
usage.
right, all these new progressive terms just skyrocket in usage in the media. And there was no increase in racism or in police shootings or anything. It's just the media caught on to this wave of talking about inequality around race and privilege and all this. And I do think that primed the field for Trump, where people felt attacked and like this was unfair. And that helped Trump get away with also having kind of the reverse norm violation, where he was very rude and direct about his thoughts. But it seems like on the political sphere, he started with this "who cares about the literal facts" thing, and things like, and being rude. I mean, no one before him had that style.
Well, at least he's funny.
Yes,
when he does this, I guess. I'm like, thank God he's bringing that. I mean, I remember Ben Shapiro in like 2020 saying, because he was more anti-Trump in 2016, and his view was like, listen, the norm violation damage has been done. The marginal norm violation from another Trump presidency was low enough that it was no longer a major factor for the way he was looking at the election, which I find somewhat convincing, I guess. I also do think, to be honest, that the Democrats lying about Biden's state for so long has been kind of underweighted as a norm violation. I mean, I guess it's not a norm violation because this has happened with past presidencies, I suppose, although maybe less obviously, but that is really bad. And I just feel like we got so excited that Biden dropped out that it was kind of forgotten how much of a betrayal that really was.
And that he's still president, right? So
yeah, and that he's still president. He's clearly not okay.
Yeah, I feel like the Trump Republicans and the modern Democrats kind of embody opposite problems in this way, where the Democrats have very much this kind of top-down kind of we'll censor what we don't like view. And you see that with Biden's age. You see that with holding Kamala Harris away from media interviews because she might start laughing like she used to do years ago. Which
I'm inspired by her.
Yeah, trained out of, as we saw during the debate. But yeah, we saw that with COVID. We see this with crime data. We see this with so many issues where they're like, if we can just hide the part that we disagree with, like, it'll be okay. And obviously that's not a healthy way to do anything. Then Trump's kind of the opposite, where he's like an open book. He'll say anything that comes to mind, whether it's that Haitians are eating cats and dogs, and maybe even if it happened a couple times, it's like, okay, but is this really what we need to be talking about as a country? So it's like opposite problems. Yeah. Pick your poison.
Yeah, no, and like the Democrat problem just like continues to feed into the right-wing perception that, you know, you can't trust the institutions. And I just feel like, how many times are we going to do this? We did it with the mask stuff with COVID. And it's like, clearly the short-term gain that you're getting is not worth the long-term distrust and anger that's being bred by this. And yeah, I don't know. It feels like the lesson should have been learned by now.
Yeah. But I don't get it. But, you know, anyway. You see this in interpersonal relations too. Like some people just in their personal lives take this approach of kind of very guarded, like have a presentation of themselves and kind of use very subtle cues to indicate what they think. And other people are just like, here's what I think. I might be a little rude, but I'm going to say it. And
other people are Richard Hanania.
Right. So it's interesting to see those two different things reflected in the different parties.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I maybe this is just my preference too. I just think I will say I don't think Trump's sort of level of no filter is a good thing by any means. It's also his biggest. The thing is, it's also his biggest like kind of asset in the sense that he comes across as authentic when other people don't. Even if the authenticity leads to something that's not people don't necessarily find pleasant, but at least they're getting something real, and it's not an insult to their intelligence. Because I think that's how people feel when they're like yeah.
But I don't feel like I'm getting something real from Trump. I feel like I'm getting something that's like almost like an AI generated rant. I don't feel like I'm getting like, oh, this is his truth. I feel that he's not controlling what he says, which feels authentic in a surface level way. But I don't feel that I'm getting authentic views and authentic positions that are consistent in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing that's like kind of, yeah, apart from and maybe this is just a function of me, and I guess Reg, you as well, not following politics day to day to derive the signal here. But a lot of these issues to me seem like all the data most of the data we have is, okay, we can look at outcomes. Those are super confounded. You can't even like correlate economic growth during a person's presidency. That's one of those things that people do that really annoys me, because it's like, I mean, there's clearly at least some lag, and even if there isn't, there's just too many things here that are noisy, such that you can only look at the expected value of some policy proposal and not really try to like tease out correlations of like things that went well during someone's presidency. So really what people are making decisions on is like, what do people say when they are asked questions, and how does that, how much signal is there in that? And I just fundamentally think there's like not much signal there. Like there's some negative signals we can get, as we've gotten out of both Trump and Harris, but I just think fundamentally it's hard, apart from looking and projecting policy proposals, to really decipher from the way Trump speaks or Harris speaks about kind of like what they're like day to day to work with. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if talking about what they're like to work with, I guess neither has a good reputation. Harris has apparently had more than 90% staff turnover in her years as vice president, which Trump had, like both Trump and Biden have had in the 70s for their staff turnover, which is also not great, but Harris even tops them. And yeah, there have been stories in Politico about hostile work environment, that she's constantly yelling at people, and so very different from the public image presented. One thing I'll say, we were talking about kind of their personal communication styles, and also with the two parties. What worries me most, covering up that Biden was senile, this was at least like a intra-Democratic Party secret affair. But with COVID, they went further, and actually when people were saying don't mask kids, they pushed Facebook to ban them, and Facebook did ban them. And so that as a journalist too, that worries me more. We have Substack where people did get the word out about a lot of these things. But I worry, I don't see a big threat in the next couple of years, even if Harris wins. But I worry if Democrats are to win in the long run, I worry about starting to lose some of the free speech abilities we have if they start to crack down on Twitter, like is happening in the EU and Brazil, and things like that, or Substack saying, "Hey, we're going to sue you because you're posting hate on your platform." And who defines hate? And like I think we're a little safe from that in the short term because of Trump's Supreme Court appointments, but right now we're relying on this interpretation of the First Amendment that includes hate speech, which of course none of us actually literally like hate speech as we define it, but it is important to have a legal protection of that, because otherwise someone defines hate speech as advocating against open borders or whatever, advocating against.
It's really interesting to me how it's hard to communicate to people why this is actually a slippery slope type of thing. Like, I'm like, I'm like, imagine that someone who had opposite values to you and also thought certain things in speech were worthy of being made illegal, and those were the things that you thought were really important to communicate. And it's like, how do you not get that this can go the other way? And when you no longer have that protection, I mean, we can see that there's some of these arrests that you hear about in the UK over people making comments on online and stuff. Like it's insane. But yeah, Twitter, the right-wing stuff I see on there on a daily basis is insane. I'm like trying to turn back on my child filter because I'm like, I turned it off and I was like, oh, maybe I do want that filter on. But I do think that there needs to be more room to just like self-select into communities. You can block and mute and all these kinds of things, and you can actually really change the environment.
Yeah,
You know,
there's a setting there to only get notifications from people who you follow or who follow you.
Right.
That's nice, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think like we both, Reg and I both like Sam Harris, and I think he's right about a lot of things. But I think the place where I sort of lose him sometimes is this. He goes on about kind of the institutions and the decay of institutions, and I think that's broadly right as like a descriptive claim. But then I think I don't understand the impulse to say that the institutions are decaying in some way because of social media. I don't think there's enough evidence to say that's true. And then secondly, this idea that then accepting that that's true, the thing we should do is like, ban other forms of information aggregation and double down on institutions that are frankly already pretty decrepit, right? But
to be fair, I don't think Sam is for any kind of like government regulation of any social media companies. I think he's for allowing them to choose their own content moderation policies and the degree to which they want to be a publisher versus a pure platform. I think that we would be better off if we went further towards viewing these as pure platforms and not expecting them, like what Substack is doing. They're making it extremely clear that they are not going to moderate things beyond First Amendment protections and some maybe I think they allow some degree of like reporting harassment probably, but they're trying to be very careful with that. And I think when they're making that clear from the very outset, they are going to be hopefully treated differently than other platforms. Although I know they've already had a couple of scandals or things that other people thought are scandals. But anyway.
Yeah, I was referring to him more talking about like Twitter, moaning about sort of like how Elon has driven Twitter to the ground, which is another thing. I'm not super online on Twitter. Maxim, what's your take on kind of because I see equal numbers of people almost saying that Twitter's changed for the better, and they seem pretty confident in that view.
Two questions actually. Yeah. Is Twitter, the experience on Twitter, better or worse for you? Pre and post, because neither of us were on Twitter that much pre-Elon. And then two, is it net positive for like our overall cultural and societal norms in some way?
Yeah, I think yes. I think it's better. I think pre-Elon Musk, basically, I think anytime you had like a real conservative right-leaning hashtag pop up and trending, it seems to have been pushed down and blocked, and that ended with Elon Musk. I think he even now has kind of reversed that, because blue checks, if you pay, you get a little more reach, and just it tends to be more right-leaning people who pay because they like Musk. So I think it has dramatically changed what people are shown on Twitter, but in a subtle enough way that there's still a huge amount of diversity there. Like you'll see a tweet from Obama or something get 150,000 retweets or something. There's still lots of left-wingers on there. But at the same time, what's surfaced for the average user has changed. I suspect it's underrated as a source of change. People talk about this vibe shift within tech and other spheres, even media to some extent. I think it's an underrated source of that change, where if you take someone like, I don't know, Nate Silver or Matt Iglesias, who's very on Twitter, the average content they're seeing is now very different than it was 3 years ago. And I think that subtly changes all of our views. We're all subject to the algorithm changing what we're thinking about. So I think Elon Musk's buy there is underrated. I also noted a lot of edgy accounts were restored, and even if they're not all great, I don't know. I feel more comfortable on a platform where anyone can speak as long as they're not, calling for people to be killed or anything. So,
Right.
yeah.
But we already have legal protections against that. Like that is not covered by the First Amendment.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think it's better to have the choice to block people rather than to not have the option to follow them, I guess, basically. So I think I agree. Although like I said, I wasn't on Twitter enough before, and it can definitely be some of the stuff I see on there. I'm like, I didn't even know people had this prejudice. Who knew? I find out something new every day. It's amazing.
Yeah, I do think, these kinds of videos that might take things out of context are fairly toxic. And it's not limited to Twitter, it's everywhere. But the kind of people who are addicted to their TikTok or Facebook, Twitter feed, they're getting a very distorted view of reality. It could be you're getting a distorted view in a racist way, or just a way that there's crime everywhere, or that you get a sense that people are much worse.
Or that people are being shot by the police all the time, also unarmed. Like going in that other direction too, obviously.
Right. So I think it is very toxic. I suspect, I agree with you, the data is not fully in, but I would be surprised if social media is at least not playing some part of the role in the deterioration of trust and all that we see going on.
Yeah, no, I think, I guess this is a broader conversation, but I think this gets brought up in, like I wrote something that was about kind of how socialism is it's like pitched as an expansion of your moral circle, but like really it's a huge tax on future people and stuff like that. And then inevitably when you write something like this, like one of the responses you'll get is something around the pointing out the specific point in the plane of trade-offs we're at currently, where they're like, well, what did all this economic growth in the last 10 or 20 years get us? Seems like it got us social media, and I think the point there is saying, well, is growth or progress actually tracking quality of life improvements in some meaningful way? And like social media seems to be kind of at the crux of people making that point, where they say, actually, this has been, you could argue it's net negative, but it's definitely not net positive. And I while I'm not going to dispute that it like has eroded trust and is a personal habits problem that a lot of people are struggling to overcome, I don't know. My instinct is to like think of it as just one point where we're still adjusting to changes in our environment, and we're already starting to develop antibodies for these things. So I guess I have an optimistic view, but I wanted to get your take on it.
I agree with that. I think we are starting to build up antibodies. I think tying this back to prediction markets, those are arguably one of them, which if anyone has tried trading in prediction markets, it really forces you to be honest with yourself, because if you're not, you're going to lose money. Even if you are honest with yourself, you might lose money. So I think everyone should trade in prediction markets, and it'll give them a little bit of humility over time. Actually, I listened to a Tyler Cowen podcast recently. He's saying, I have no interest in this, but I think everyone should try it because, again, it gives you some epistemic humility. It's easy to say, Harris is obviously going to win because everyone I know is voting for her. Or I was almost certain Biden would not drop out based on looking at the incentives. I didn't see what was in it for him. All of the power brokers, Obama, Pelosi, Schumer, went to Biden and said, hey, you should drop out. Seems like they were pretty forceful about it. It still seems like he could have stayed in if he had wanted, but it's just like, are you going to go against all your friends, everyone you know? And he said, no, don't have the energy for that. So, but I was sure. I bet on the markets. I lost a bunch of money, and I'm still up. Like, I have a good track record overall, but it reminds you,
it's hard to beat the market.
Yeah, right. It's hard to beat the market. And if you're going to even try, you got to try really hard to limit your biases, which most people just don't even try. If you're a Twitter influencer, your incentive is not to limit your biases.
Yeah.
So prediction markets are so healthy in this way. And yeah, Manifold is a play money market. Even just play money, gets you to think in the right way.
I was at an EA conference, and I think it was somebody involved with Metaculus, but he was making the case for when you go to Thanksgiving dinner and you have that awkward conversation with the relatives, instead of letting it blow up, force everybody to make a prediction and set a bet in like a bottle of wine or something, something that's not money, that's not too aggressive with like people you know are having disagreements with. But I thought that was funny, and
I like it.
I'm sure most people would just not want to make the bet. Which is the recognition of humility, whether you explicitly state it or not.
Yeah, it is amazing. Like, so we met at this kind of rationalist conference, Manifest, a couple months ago, and it is amazing. You know, rationalists have been thinking for about a decade. I don't know if the viewers know, it's kind of this school of thought founded by a couple of people on Less Wrong and other websites, where they're trying to minimize their bias, to have clearer, better thinking. And there are so many ways to do that. Just one of it is ask someone, they say, oh, this is going to happen. This and that is going to happen. What percent would you put on that happening? Like, immediately it causes a mental shift. Like, oh, well, I guess it's not really 100%. That is it. I don't do this enough, actually. I should try to do this more in my conversations rather than just counter arguing. Just, well, what percent? So there are tools like that. And then, of course, betting with over a bottle of wine, like you were saying, is the next step there. So you gave a
and then real money.
Right. Yeah. So
actually, if you live in like all of us, if you live in the U.S., if you're a U.S. resident, what's possible? Like, just to give people a lay of the land, like, what type of questions can you bet on with money? Like, I know the play money stuff on Metaculus, Manifold, you can go and knock yourself out. But
so, as of now, Americans can trade on Predicted, and it has very limited options because the government is trying to shut it down right now. They're trying to revoke this legal permission they gave it a decade ago. The courts may say that the government cannot revoke that, so it may or may not last. But right now, Americans can legally bet on the election at predicted.org. And max $850, so it's pretty limited. I believe some people are
limited for making money, but you can at least settle personal bets, I guess.
Right. Great point. Yeah, and I believe some people are less legally. Some Americans are using VPNs to trade on crypto sites. Probably it's not so illegal that anyone's going to get punished for it, but it's a gray area for sure. You also have Kalshi is a regulated entity, so it's legal to trade there. They have all sorts of markets on, like, what will the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision be. They have some other markets of, global warming, like these kinds of events. They just won a court case like days ago, that they are allowed to list election contracts, but the government may appeal, so this may be reversed in a couple of weeks or not. But hopefully people will soon be able to legally trade there on the elections. But right now they have all sorts of other things. So that's cool as well. So yeah, and then next year the government might totally ban it. And we'll just, it's an ongoing government bureaucratic dispute.
Because it's like if you have questions around interest rates and stuff, I guess that those type of questions are marginally less interesting because they get answered by financial markets anyway. Like, there's implied, you could look up the implied interest rate cuts, etc. But on things that are more, the climate change stuff. I know one thing that's interesting is, on Manifold or Metaculus, there's all these questions around AI, for example, and I'm sort of very skeptical of those because it seems like most of the top forecasters also happen to be within the same kind of intellectual subspace that has views on AI risk, for example. So it'd be
Right.
cool to see how those things fare on actual money prediction markets when they do open up, and like if we do get there, right?
But even
yeah,
if
like
you do, it's still going to be people who are most interested. Like, there's always going to be some degree to which people who are most interested in the topic spend more time forecasting it. And in something like interest rate cuts, it's unlikely that that's a source of bias because people are just interested in it. Whereas in the AI risk or climate change or something like that, the people who might be like the most motivated have a deeper connection. But anyway. Well, thank you for giving us the overview of prediction markets forecasting. We keep saying we're going to look into these forecasting and prediction markets thing, but neither of us have participated yet at all. Just
I've actually made predictions and been somewhat won some play money on some Israel Hamas stuff because I was following the war closely, and then I made a huge bet on something and. On Hezbollah and Israel getting to full-fledged war and lost a lot. So
yeah, we've all been
okay. Well, I'm sorry to speak for you.
Vaisha started a gambling habit, unbeknown to you.
I know. I'm finding this out now. Finding this out live, everybody. Not worried at all. No, but thanks so much for coming on, Maxim. Maxim, as he mentioned, has a Substack at Maximum Truth. He's also on Twitter at Maxim Lott. And the website is electionbettingodds.com. Wait, did I get that right?
Yep, you did. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, is there anywhere else you want to direct people to, Maxim, in the meantime?
I think that's about it. Yeah, the Substack Maximum Truth, that has all my updates and data deep dives and research. So I encourage people to follow me there.
Great. Well, thanks again, and see you all next time.
Cool. Thank you, guys.